And then we have been in a series now for the last several weeks called Resolve. And really this one has been all about conflict and kind of managing conflict, working through it. And we basically just said, hey, conflict is kind of it's inevitability. It's going to happen. We are imperfect people. We can't help ourselves. We're going to mess stuff up. It's just kind of who we are. And we need relationships really, really bad. And so we said, because of those two realities, there's going to be a space in between those where conflict exists. And so we said, learning the skill set of how do I get through conflict and do it well when that happens becomes a very important skill set. It's super important. And what we actually discovered, it's really actually very, very important to the heart of God and kind of central to how he thinks about us. So we said all of this really matters a ton. Whether I'm a follower of Jesus today or not, I'm going to understand more of kind of who God is, how he views me. And then certainly I'm going to understand if I want a good, solid friendship, a long-term romantic relationship, if I want to be part of a team or a family, you name it. If I want healthy relationships, I got to figure this thing out. And so that's kind of been the journey we've been on over the last several weeks now. And a couple disclaimers I gave you guys and encouragements before we started all these conversations. I think they're all super important. One of them is a great resource that we've been referring is called the book Peacemaker by Ken Sande. It's a bigger book, but man, if you take your time and get through it, I think it'll be very, very helpful, called Peacemaker. We said, I highly encourage you, if you were in the thick of conflict right now, I really encourage you to listen to the entirety of this series before moving towards someone to try to make peace in that relationship. I want you to understand the whole process, right? So if you're jumping in today, catch up on the old ones. If you've been kind of traveling with us, make sure to finish the next handful of weeks here as we kind of finish it out. But that whole context is one big conversation. I think it's going to matter a ton. The last thing we said is this: if you were in a situation right now that is abusive and your safety is at risk in any way, this conversation is not for you in a specific way. You should take action to get safe. Let us know, call the authorities, make a move. Don't apply these principles directly to that situation. It's a different conversation, right? So if there's physical abuse or abuse happening where your safety is at risk, we're not talking about that. There's a little different approach, of course, to what that would look like. So what we've been doing over the last several weeks is really looking at this verse in the book of Romans. It says this: if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, be at peace with all people, right? Be at peace with all men. If it's possible, it's not always possible to be at peace in a relationship. We want it. We want to long for that peace. It's not always going to be the case that we can fully work towards a peaceful resolution in conflict. But as far as it depends on me, that's right, the next phrase that we've been spending a lot of time on there is really looking at what does it mean for me to be fully faithful? What is in my sphere of responsibility to own if I'm going to move to a place of reconciliation in a relationship, as far as it depends on me? So we've been having a lot of conversations about that. And then what does it mean to make peace if I'm in a broken relationship? And as we advance in the series, we're going to get deeper into that. What we want to do today, we're right on the precipice, right on the edge of being able to move towards looking at how do I bring up the other person's part, right? Jesus actually tells us to do that. Look at this verse. We're going to actually look at this verse deeper next week. Matthew 18:15. Here's what Jesus would say. He says, if your brother or sister sins, go point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. So Jesus actually tells us to do that. He says, hey, I want you to go and tell somebody if they have sinned against you, if there's brokenness in our relationship, that there's an action point in our court to move on that. However, we're not quite ready to do that part yet. You're like, oh man, I was ready to shift to talking about them, right? But this is actually going to be for next week. We'll start to dive into that. There are some really, really important truths right before this in Matthew 18, in a conversation that Jesus was having, that we need to understand how this verse functions, where it sits in that context, because it's going to be directly in connection to how we would think about approaching somebody in a broken relationship. So I want to show you these verses. If you have a Bible and you want to open it to Matthew chapter 18, you can. If you don't have a Bible, you have some right underneath your chairs there, right in front of you in those racks. In fact, if you need a physical copy of the Bible, please take one. You can grab one, write your name in it, make it your own, write notes in it, use it. We'd love to give that to you as a gift, just to say thanks for being with us this weekend. But here's Matthew 18. We're going to actually back up about 5 verses into Matthew 18:10. Here's what Jesus is going to say. He says, "See that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven." So Jesus in Matthew 18 is going to refer to little ones, which basically are going to be his followers, his disciples. And he's going to say, hey, these people that have chosen to follow me, I care about them. I love them. I am for them. Don't despise them. You're going to be in relational breakdown at times with each other, and you're going to hurt each other. But he says, see to it that you don't despise them. Why? He says, because there's angels in heaven that fight for the good of those people, which is a really mind-blowing truth. He says, I tell you, their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. And this verse is often used to talk about guardian angels. I don't know that that's necessarily the point, but angels exist. They are real. And the point of what Jesus is driving at is God in heaven, in the heavenly realm, is at work to move towards the good of the people that God is working with and working in, to work in the lives of followers of Jesus. He says, this stuff matters. I want you to understand that don't hate what God loves. Don't despise the little ones that God is working for. In some ways, he's saying if you do that, you're working directly against what God is trying to do. He goes on and says, what do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 in the hills and go to look for the one that wandered off? If he finds it, truly I tell you, he's happier about that one sheep than about the 99 that did not wander off. So right, he's talking about a shepherd and kind of a shepherd's mindset. This is a little foreign to us. I don't think I know any shepherds as of today, like here in our Northeast Ohio context. I was in Israel a few times and got to interact with shepherds, and it's fascinating that they function in a lot of ways very much like they would have functioned 2,000 years ago when Jesus said this. And they would live and travel with their sheep, and sheep are not the super smartest animals, and what they tend to do, even though it's not good for them, is they tend to drift away, right? They get focused on something, and they find themselves drifting away, and they'll get into situations that they can't get out of. Their heads will get stuck literally in crags of the rocks, and they'll get trapped, and animals can attack them. So a shepherd is going to have the mindset that he cares not just for the group of sheep. He doesn't just love them as a group. He loves them as individuals. And he's going to care when that sheep gets away, he's going to care that that one gets rescued. Even at some risk to the 99, to the group itself, to go after the one, that's going to be the heart and the mindset of a shepherd and how a shepherd would function. Jesus is going to say, in the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones should perish. Saying that this is how my Father thinks of these people, maybe that you're frustrated with. His heartbeat, his longing is that they come back into right relationship with me, that they come back into right relationship with the people around them. My heart, in essence, is what he's saying, is my heart is for them. Super important to understand and to know. And when I think about this, here's kind of the picture that we've been working with here for the last couple weeks. We've been saying, here's the reality. there's a rift between two people. There's a reality that God is in the equation. He sees me and he sees the other person, and he understands that there's brokenness between us. When I think about how I might view somebody who is sinning against me, or somebody who is doing something that I'm not excited about, what we'll tend to do is we'll begin to zero in and dial into a set of people's behaviors. Their behaviors. They did this to me. They said this to me. Sometimes these behaviors and the exterior of people's lives, the decisions they made, the actions they took, the words they said, these behaviors become so crystal clear in our minds, and it becomes our sole focus. This is what they did, and what they did affected me, and I'm frustrated and I'm hurt, and that hurt is real, and often we're right that the behaviors are often sinful and wrong, right? There's a reality to that. There's also a reality that this person is more than their behavior. That this person has a heart, all right, underneath here, that there's something that drives this person, that they have a story, and that there's something that goes kind of beyond the behavior, deeper than that, and that there's a heart that Jesus is actually calling us to look to. And he's saying, in essence, the sheep that wandered off, did they do something stupid? Absolutely. Did they do the wrong thing? Yes, totally. I can choose to interact with that sheep and say, hey, that sheep did something stupid. If they get eaten by a wolf, oh well. If they get lost and trapped in a crag, oh well. If they've run off the cliff, good riddance, right? See you later, sheep. Or I can look at them and say, I care for that one. I'm going to go fight for that one. I'm going to go after that one. I'm going to interact with them, not on the basis of their behavior, but I'm going to make a decision, a conscious decision, to choose to care about this person, and I'm going to recognize that they have a heart underneath all of that. Man, I am so glad that people have interacted with me that way. When I think back about my entry point into the church, it's almost comical today, right? I didn't grow up in the church, for those of us who don't know each other, and so when I literally have no church background at all. So when I came into the church, I showed up and I didn't know the rules. I didn't know what you shouldn't ask. And so I asked questions that everybody's like, dude, you're not allowed to ask that question. Nobody asks that, right? And I was like, oh, I didn't know that was a problem. I said words that church people do not say, okay? I said all the words. I was just like, oh, didn't know you shouldn't say that word out loud, right? And some people heard the words that I said, and they were like, not church words. I hate that. I don't know what to do with that guy. They saw my behavior, and they rejected me because of that. It just short-circuited them, right? That's a cuss word. He said it out loud in church. He's going to spontaneously combust, right? I mean, those were the assumptions, is that's what's going to happen to that guy. You're like, Ryan, you really did that? Oh, yeah. Yep, cussed in church, had no idea. I'm not even sure if I knew I was doing it, right? Other people looked at me and they recognized what was going on. They're like, oh, this guy who is cussing and doesn't know all the church things and doesn't know doesn't know the words to the songs, doesn't know that we don't ask those questions because that makes us all uncomfortable. And right, he doesn't know all the things. But underneath here, he's got a heart that loves Jesus, and he's a brand new follower of Christ. And this is actually really exciting what's happening. And then those people they made a conscious decision. This is the critical part. They made a conscious decision, right? When they had a decision to make on which of these two lines to double down on, they chose to double down on this one. They chose to see me for me and who I could become and where I was, and that I had a story that I was coming out of. And they chose not to double down on the behavior side of the equation, and they fought for my heart. Some people would move towards me in frustration and judgment, and they were right. I was doing the wrong things often, right? I was saying things that were not right by any standard. They were right. I was doing the wrong thing. And some people tried to argue that with me and work with me on the basis of my behaviors. Some people interacted with me according to my heart. I'm so glad that people didn't give up on me. I'm glad that they didn't stop because of this ugly exterior that I was in at the time. I'm certainly glad that that's how that played out in a moment of conflict. I think when we're thinking about when we're thinking about interacting in this relational breakdown, I think we have to really isolate what is the goal. What is it exactly we're trying to do when we are in a conflict? And the answer to that question is going to determine how we position ourselves and how we set ourselves up and how we approach somebody else. What is the goal of this interaction? And the clear thrust of Scripture from this passage we just looked at and all throughout the Bible, and the fact that God sent Jesus, here is the essence of what I think our takeaway is on what the goal should be, right? Here it is. The goal is not to win the argument. The goal is to win the heart. The goal is not to win the argument. You did wrong, and let me show you how wrong you are in all that you did, and let me be right and you be incorrect. That's not the focus, because here's the thing. We're always going to have that. If you are a human being that is not Jesus, you are going to do something wrong in relationship. And let me just say this. If you want to find something in my life or anybody else's life that is not correct, you are going to be able to find that. If you want to look at my life and dial in and find a flaw or imperfection or something I should have done that I didn't, right? Or I did something I should, right? You name it, you're going to be able to find it. You're going to be able to find that. And the levels of disappointment that I've had play out in people's lives, it's incredible, right? I will disappoint you. And if you're looking to understand if I will disappoint you as your pastor, let me just help save you time. Yes, I will disappoint you at some point. I'm a human, and I'm not going to stop being human. I wish I could sometimes. This is true in your life. This is true in my life. So at the end of the day, we have a decision to make. Does the focus on somebody's heart and loving the person change the fact that these behaviors are wrong? Not in the least. Not in the least. What it does, though, is it changes my focus. If I'm always going to be focused on this part, I can't see through to the deeper person and begin to ask maybe better questions. Rather than asking the question, what did you do wrong? How did you hurt me? How could you have met my expectations better? Maybe we start to ask these questions. What's maybe going on in your life right now? What is the pain that you're wrestling with maybe right now that I don't know anything about? What is your story? Where did you come from? Right? As we're thinking about the person, what is it that's driving you right now? Are you scared? Are you alone? Are you afraid? Are you anxious? What's going on in here? And that maybe you inappropriately are showing up and coming out here and you're doing weird, wrong things. But if I understood the heart better, I would understand some of how you got here. Listen, not an excuse, but a reason. And I can understand. And man, I'll tell you, we're sure glad when people look at us and they look at our behaviors, right? They look at the reality of what we've done. We definitely want people to understand what's going on in here, not just what's showing up out here. That we aren't just the drink that we drank or the substance that we used or the words that we said or the decisions that we made. We aren't our past that we came from. We so want somebody to look past that and look deeper into our lives and see the longings of our heart and even the pain sometimes to be understood. And we want somebody to fight for that. And when I start to understand that that's how God views me, then I can begin to reflect that and offer that to other people. Right? The goal is not to win the argument. The goal is to win the heart. James talks about this in a general way here in James 5. He's talking about when somebody has drifted away from the faith, what should our posture be towards them? Listen to this. This is fascinating. 5:19 and 20, he says, my brothers and sisters, if one of you should wander from the truth and someone should bring that person back, remember this. Whoever turns a sinner from the error of their way will save them from death and cover over a multitude of sins. James is saying, hey, when somebody's heart starts to drift away from the truth, they start believing lies and believing things that aren't real and aren't accurate, what will happen is they will drift into a multitude of sins. They're going to do all kinds of things that they know they don't want to be. The behaviors are going to start to follow, and when somebody's heart drifts away from the truth, he says, when you fight to influence, and you see their heart and you care about them, you look past what they have done and choose to love the person, if you can be used by God to influence that heart, what will happen is you will actually, over the long term, affect that person's behavior. The heart changes and then the behaviors will follow. Imperfectly, certainly, but slowly but surely, the change is from the inside out, right? We live, whether we recognize it or not, from the heart out. God changes our hearts first, and then our lives follow, right? The question begins to be, though, how does this work? How do I do it? If I'm going to start to think about and get in the ballpark of approaching somebody about the situation they're in, how might I do that? I love this passage in Galatians 6. The Apostle Paul says this, brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, or you also may be tempted. It goes on, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Paul says something super important to us here. He said when this person is caught in a behavior, right? And in this passage is not specifically about always a conflict that the person sinned against me, saying in a general way, same with James. But the principle applies. When somebody's in a sin, I can choose to see this or see that. And he says, I want to see deeper. If they're caught in a sin, I want to restore the person, but I want to do it gently. We're not going to come at people and attack them or judge them according to what they're doing in a moment, right? We might bring that up and help bring accountability and help them see where they've drifted. But what I want to do is I want to fight for the heart. And guys, this is what you and I would want. I would want that. When I drift in life, when I'm caught in a sin, I certainly would value and measure the love of the people around me by their willingness and their guts to come get me and help me get back on track. I actually really value people that love me enough to lovingly, gently, privately come have a conversation with me about a concern they may have in my life. That's happened to me a handful or so times. Probably should have happened more. When that's happened to me, sometimes I reacted defensively in the moment, right? Because, man, you're talking about something I'm doing. I don't like that. It hurts. In the big picture, I feel deeply loved by that person. They cared enough to move towards me in relationship, to bring it up. That they could have let me drift off into oblivion, and they didn't. And instead, they chose to pursue me, to see past the ugly exterior and draw assumptions about me, and instead fight for Ryan the person, not just Ryan the behavior. All right, this part is who I am. This is what I do. And we feel loved when people do that for us. In the big picture scale, what Paul's saying is this is what you should be willing to do for each other. I love that in this passage he says, be careful, right? Be careful, watch yourselves, or you may also be tempted. Don't just look at those exterior behaviors and say, oh, I could never do that. I'm incapable of sinning like that person sinned. I would never drift in that way. Watch yourselves, he says. We're all susceptible to getting in that kind of trouble, especially if we don't think we are. And then this last part of the passage is fascinating to me. I've read this verse, Galatians 6:2, a bunch of times. Carry each other's burdens. In this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. And often I would think of that as, I should help people who are followers of Jesus. I should make them meals. I should be there for them when they're sad. I should carry their burdens because they've got a lot on their plate. And I think that's a fine application of this verse. I just want us to see it in the context of where Paul is here. He's saying, hey, if someone's caught in a sin, if they're in the midst of ugly, gently restore that person, love them, carry their burdens, be committed to them even while they're fighting through and working through a drift situation. Fulfill the law of Christ. Isn't this what Jesus did for you? Didn't he choose to love you in the midst of your awful behavior? That's what we're being asked to do. I want to love my brother or my sister even when they're off the rails a little bit, when they're derailing into oblivion, rather than look at them and saying, they're drifting away. See, I knew that would happen. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't make that call. They voted for them. Whew. Whatever it is, however you view it, that would cause that distance reaction to happen. Paul says, no, man, get under that thing. Commit to that person. Move towards them, not repel away from them. Because that's exactly the law of love is the law of Christ. So Jesus did for us when we were a force that repelled God because of his holiness. He didn't extend distance from us. He moved towards us. In fact, he moved radically towards us and became one of us and put skin on here. That's what Jesus was doing when he came to the planet. When Jesus came here and lived a perfect life and died an innocent death and rose victoriously from the dead to offer us life, that's what he was doing. Bearing our burdens, our behaviors, our sin. Why? Because he cared so deeply about the heart. That's what he was going for, right? And he offered to have our heart changed from the inside out. Right? I'll give you a new heart, to be born again, to be made new. That's what God would do for us. Now that we understand the goal, what's this whole thing about? It's not about winning the argument, who's right or less right or more right or a little bit less, right? It's not about rightness. It's not about the argument. It's not about stacking up and asking whose percentage of guilt is higher. That's not the conversation. The goal is about getting to peace and helping this person to be back in right relationship with us, and more importantly, back in right relationship with God if there's brokenness there. That's the goal, to win the heart. Now that I know that, I can hear this verse properly. Matthew 18:15, if your brother or your sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you've won them over. So some of us would have been, if you grew up in church, you've been raised when, and I have at times in my life heard this verse as permission to go attack somebody for their behaviors. Go point out their fault. You did this. Just between us, right? I'll show you. Jesus is saying, hey, what about the 99, the one who has drifted away? God doesn't want anybody to perish. We want to fight for the heart of the person. If your brother or sister sins against you, go to them, point out their fault. If they listen to you, you have won them. You've won the heart. That's the goal. That's the reason why we would have clear teaching in Scripture about what to do when this happens. Because the Father is fighting for our hearts, and the same God is fighting for their hearts. That person that makes you insane, he is just as passionate about that person as he is about you. And if you're here today and you don't know how passionate God is for you, then you absolutely have to start here. You absolutely have to know. You have to know that when God the Father looks at you, he doesn't just see this exterior. He knows everything you've ever done. He knows all the words, the hateful words, the harmful words, the gossipy words. He knows all the decisions that you made that you would go back and you would change if you could go back and change them. He knows the people that you've hurt. He knows the parts of your life that you would say, man, it was a train wreck. He knows all the exterior. He knows all of it, even what rages in our own minds. And it was his call and his decision to move past all of that to send Jesus to change us from the inside out and to win us. To win us. He did that. If you've never been won to Jesus, if you've never said yes to him, it's got to start there. Because his offer of mercy for you and for me is the only way that we can really get in the right ballpark to understand what it means to give mercy to someone else. I forgive because I've been forgiven. I offer mercy because I've been offered mercy. When Jesus was here living perfectly and dying innocently, it was about your heart and my heart that he was fighting for. Scripture says he didn't come to judge, he came to save. It's the idea. Say, Ryan, if I wanted to say yes to that, how would that look? You simply have to recognize that your behaviors have been inappropriate and wrong. Mine too. Right? I need someone to forgive me. I've done what I'm not proud of. I need a savior. Someone help me not to do this. I recognize that what Jesus was coming to do was to live a life I could never live on my own. He's the only one that did this perfectly. And when I say yes to him, my sins will be forgiven. All of my behaviors are covered by his sacrifice on the cross. And now I have a new heart, a new life. And that new heart and that new life will begin to affect my decisions and my behaviors out here in the exterior parts of my life. If you never said yes to that, you can do that today. You can simply say, Jesus, forgive me. I want to follow you. I want you to be my God. It's literally saying I'm in. I believe it. I believe. I choose to believe that you lived a life I never could live. That puts us in the ballpark, guys, where now we can begin to understand what mercy is. And for the rest of us, you're a follower of Jesus. I bet you resonate with this. The longer I follow Christ, the more I see and feel and experience that what God is really about is, and what he wants me to be about, is mercy. Mercy. As a broken person, living with broken people, I have no option as a recipient of mercy but to become a person of mercy. That's what he wants from me. It's what Jesus said. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And this one's hard for me. When I came to know Jesus, I loved justice. I loved it. I could see and clearly articulate what you did and how you failed me and what you did wrong, and I could tell you that and draw you a picture of it, right? I could lay it out. And this line for me was it was so strong on what behaviors, and sometimes it still is. And over the last 20 years of following Jesus, what's begun to happen in me is I'm starting to see the heart more and more, and it's starting to become the instinct that I care here more and more. And this is more vivid for me than this box is. Now, I want to see into the heart of the person. What is their loneliness and their pain and their hurt, and where is this behavior coming from? And how does God view that human being? And man, I got a long way to go, but I want this more and more. I want to understand the mercy of God for me and then reflect that to others. Guys, if we're going to have any hope of having great human relationships, we have to understand and experience the relationship that we can have with God. That's where it's all got to start. And I know that this part hurts. It's real. Because there's real pain here and real brokenness. And it's far easier to stare here than it is to soften our hearts and to care and to stare here. But it's how God would have us respond. And I believe it's how he's leading us even today. As the band comes up, would you wrestle with all of this, allowing his mercy to change us from the inside out? Would you pray with me? Lord, it continues to blow our minds that you are eager to forgive. That when you see us wandering off in foolishness and stupidity, that you're eager to go get us and to have us turn back and reconnect to your heart. And then when that happens in the life of somebody around us, that you have the same heart for them. Or you love your children and you want everybody to come into the family and you love unity. God, would you give us the courage to love the ways that you love? To show mercy the ways that you have shown mercy to us. Lord, help us to live as your children today. Make us brave, God. Be with us now.